Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Wade. I'm an MLTI ambassador. This PD is all about engaging students with inquiry. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with defining inquiry and what it is, kind of look at the highlights of it. Then we're going to look at the different types of inquiry. Then we're going to look at what could inquiry look like, and then we're going to go at some ways to get started planning for putting inquiry into your classroom. So let's start with what is inquiry. So inquiry-based approach is driven by students' curiosity about the world around them. The important piece of this is the student's curiosity, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Encourages connection, cooperation, collaboration, allows students to pose and solve problems together and with their communities and share authentic learning experiences. So this is such a huge idea, inquiry. It's such a big undigestible idea. Like when I first started learning about inquiry, I was like, this is absolutely huge. How can I possibly do this and still meet the standards that I have to work within inside of my classroom? So what I did is just kind of, I broke it down into kind of the three big pieces of inquiry. So the first one is students participating. They're exploring, they're making meaning, they're asking questions, they're sharing ideas. And then the other one is that students are learning by doing. So rather than memorizing facts, students are applying learning and skills. And I'm going to pause right here for a moment and just kind of challenge kind of public education, I suppose, in a way, with this idea of memorizing facts in things along that nature, and kind of push back and say, content is really important. I absolutely agree. Content is a super important part of school, but it's not the end all be all of school. Schools through technology and being able to have little computers in our pockets all the time, or on our wrists, or right in front of us. We have access to facts and information and content relatively easily. But what we don't have access to is how do you use the skills that content kind of drives. So I would say that one of the most important things about inquiry and working with this idea of inquiry is, instead of focusing on on content, start thinking about what skill do you want your students to learn, and how can the content be a part of that skill learning piece. Which is where the learn by doing piece comes in, right? They're applying that learning, or they're applying that skill to a new situation or an authentic situation. The third one is the idea is student driven, and this is a big idea, and it actually when we get to the types in a second, I'll show you where this fits in. But the students drive the learning, and the teacher facilitates. This is like the end of inquiry. This is like what happens when you've practiced and students are comfortable with inquiry, and you get to the end and you have the opportunity to just kind of let them go. But student driven, it doesn't necessarily have to be just free for all, right? It doesn't have to just be like let your students come up with their curriculum all by themselves and they just spend all their time researching it. There are other ways to do this where you could have some student driven pieces to the inquiry, which leads us to the difference between inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, and project-based learning. So this is a fantastic Venn diagram. It's a really great way to think about this. Inquiry is, again, like you can see, it begins with sets of questions, but I would argue that so is problem-based learning, and so is project-based learning. The focus is on this process of discovery in inquiry-based learning. That's a really important piece of this. Whereas, for problem-based, you're solving authentic real-world problems, which again can be part of inquiry. And applying knowledge and skills, again, can be part of inquiry. But the most important parts of this are the middle there, where all the Venn diagrams kind of focus. And you've got the student-centered piece, the encouraging active learning and critical thinking, and effective models for learning. So these are really, really important pieces of all of these. But since we're only talking about inquiry-based, I wanted to make sure that we had this idea because, it's easy to confuse the three. And honestly, there is a lot of crossover. I can easily see how, the essential questions for inquiry-based learning can very much be authentic learning experiences, authentic real-world problems, authentic questions that students develop solutions to problems fits here between project-based and problem-based, but I would argue that you could use part of it in inquiry-based as well. So the idea of this chart is more so to kind of look at all of these skills as a whole, right? A project-based learning creates visual and multimedia material as an end product, right? As an assessment piece, which is again really important. But it doesn't mean it can't be part of the other two as well. So, think of this not necessarily. I mean, the Venn diagram is a perfect example of the differences in terms of definition, but it's not by any means, you know, rigid in the idea that a long-term project where students explore possible answers, right? That's part of project-based learning, but it can actually that absolutely can fit into an inquiry-based learning as well, if you have it focus more on have it focus more on the idea of discovery, right? That students are discovering these different pieces. So let's dive into these types here, because that's where I was getting to a few minutes ago. So I found this to be a very helpful infographic on inquiry. You have the pool here, right? You have the shallow and then deeper and deeper and deeper, right? Until you get to the deep end of the pool. And it is important. I like this idea because these 4 different types of inquiry really kind of fit well with this idea of a very shallow dive into inquiry, structured inquiry, a very shallow beginning inquiry project where the students follow the lead of the teacher as a class and engage in one inquiry together, meaning that the teacher gives them their materials, the teacher helps them focus, the teacher is leading the discussions, not teaching to the kids necessarily, but leading and facilitating with the students as a whole group. That's kind of the beginning. Then you have the controlled inquiry, where the teacher chooses the topics for students and the resources, but allows the students to work through and come up with their own answers to the questions. This is probably something that most of us have done before in the past, where we've given them a topic about some content that we're working on, and maybe given them some resources to start with, and then have the students go through and answer whatever questions you've set up for them to focus on that content. Next is, again, a bit deeper here. We're getting a little more deep into this pool with the idea of guided inquiry, where the teacher chooses the topic and the questions, and the students are let go from there. You just give them a question, and their job is to figure the rest of it all out on their own. So it could be that they're taking that question and doing all their research on their own, or they're taking that question and they're designing a product or finding a solution to a question, which kind of goes back to the idea, right? Like, if we're looking at this as just inquiry and not project-based learning, there wouldn't be a product or solution, but there absolutely can be. We don't want to pigeonhole ourselves as teachers. Like, I think that's, let the folks who build definitions decide what these things are. But in the real world, in actual practice, we are doing these things. We're putting all this stuff together in different ways. And then the last one is the deep end of the pool, which is a free inquiry. And this is where students are on their own. They choose their own topics. They're on their own for research. They have to teach themselves a new skill, or they may be figuring out how to do fundraising, or they maybe figure out how they can be a part of an animal shelter or a rescue shelter, for how they can contribute to that in some way. But I will say this: I have used all 4 of these different types of inquiry, and one year I didn't scaffold it as well as I should have. Skipped straight from structured and controlled inquiry and just did it once or twice and went right into free inquiry I did a genius hour. And my students struggled so hard with this that we actually had to pause and go back and practice some of these other 3 first. This pool idea is great in terms of where you should, the idea of the depth that you would work in these different types of inquiry. But it is truly better to start at the beginning and work your way down, just like if you were learning to swim, right? You start in the shallow end and then you get deeper and deeper and deeper. Because if you just skip the free inquiry, students who are used to being in a classroom where it is very structured and the teacher is the teacher, if you just all of a sudden say, hey, do whatever you want, learn about whatever you want, a lot of them will just fall apart. Even a simple question is something, and this is truly what I ran into, even as something as simple as, what do you like? What do you like to do when you're not in school? And just shrugs and glassy eyeballs. It's just like, a very simple question, just because those type of students aren't necessarily used to this idea of being asked, like, what do you like to do and what do you want to learn about? That's hard for kids sometimes. But if you start from the beginning and work your way down, that builds that comfort with that inquiry process until you can get to this free inquiry, which you may never do because it may not ever fit what you're doing. Free inquiry is very much designed to be whatever students are interested in. But if you then go back and make it a little more guided, then that's fantastic. Like, you can absolutely do that. There's there's no reason that you can't combine these together to make it usable for your students, so that you can follow your standards and allow for that free inquiry as well. So let's see what it could look like. So we have a structured inquiry here. You could ask the question, how does recycling help the planet, right? The teacher leads the whole class to create solutions. Then you have a controlled inquiry. So how can we prove the Pythagorean theorem? Teacher gives students website, games, activities, so individual students can answer the question, right? You're controlling what they're doing. You give them the question, you give them the research. Guided inquiry, how can gerrymandering affect elections? Students are on their own to find the answers and create their final products. They can work together as small groups. The teacher really is just there to provide support, and that's all, not any direct instruction. And then last but not least is students pick their own topics, do their own research, right? They decide everything, every single aspect of the entire project. And this is this link, where the Genius Hour right here, this is a link to, I'll click it real quick, a Genius Hour article from We Are Teachers that I thought was really fantastic. So if you're interested in a Genius Hour, this is a really fantastic kind of walkthrough with some really great resources available to help you kind of get started. But again, don't start with a Genius Hour. That is, students just, they don't know what to do. So begin here in the beginning. You could even skip structured inquiry and go right to controlled inquiry and guided inquiry, if that makes sense for your students. But I absolutely do not recommend starting with free inquiry. They fall apart. So let's talk about getting started. The first one is something I've used for a very long time. I'm a science teacher. I've taught science and math for about 20 years now. And with the adoption of the next generation science standards, what came from that was this, at least for me learning about this, was this idea of 5 E's, which is where you start with something engaging. In science, we call it a anchoring phenomena, but you start with an engagement piece, and then you allow students the time to explore on their own. And again, this is where some of that inquiry comes in, is, are they exploring something that you've provided for them to explore? Are they on their own to kind of answer some of these questions that have been activated from the engagement piece, right? And let me come back to engagement for just a second. One of the things that is really important about engagement is you start with some sort of thing to catch your interest, right? But then how this becomes an inquiry piece is that students then ask questions about that event, whatever it was, a video or an experiment or a reading of some sort, whatever it might be. It doesn't matter what the engagement is, but that then activates their students' questions, right? It's kind of draws them into this. Let's start asking questions about this. And then from there, you can decide what you want to do next. You can use those questions and give them to students and have them start exploring them. Here, it really, you can have the questions that have nothing to do with your standard. You could put on a choice wall or something like that for later, for students to do whatever you do for extra stuff. Maybe it's a extra credit activity or something like that. But you can focus the questions a little bit so that you stay on task or on standard, and then the students can explore. And again, through inquiry, they can explore on their own, or you can give them some links to start them off with. It really kind of depends. But this is where they start to build their ideas about the answers to those questions. So then you get the explain part, and the explain piece is kind of twofold. It might be the opportunity for you to make sure that there are no misconceptions, that everybody has a clear understanding of whatever it is specifically that they need to know. But it can also be an opportunity for students to explain what they have found. So if we go back to Engage real quick, and you had 6 questions that were that would help move your learning target forward, or your standard forward, and you break students up into groups, and their job is to research those 6 questions. When it comes to the explain piece, then they're sharing the answers to those questions with everybody else. Uh, so that's one way of kind of using the inquiry model to be able to get these first 3 down. Next is elaborate. Students apply that knowledge or that new skill to a new situation. So you develop kind of next step questions after this. So if you've kind of gone through this part, you look back at your questions again and you say, okay, what else do we need to go here? Where do we need to dive deeper? How can this be applied to something, to the guiding question, whatever your guiding question was? And then the last step is the evaluate piece, which is students reflect on their knowledge, but it's also an opportunity for you to figure out how you're going to assess whatever it is that you're trying to assess, whatever standard it is that you're trying to assess. So I love the 5Es. I plan all of my units this way now, and then hyperlink all my links to stuff, or if it's going to be inquiry and the students are going to be working on their own. There are lots of ways that you can apply this 5Es to an inquiry project. There's really no like perfect way. Like it really all kind of depends. And if worse comes to worse, and you are like, well, I get the engage piece, I've got that makes total sense, but you are going to, and you got the explore, you're like, okay, I'm going to give students these sites, these resources to be able to find the answers to these questions, and you get to the explain part and you don't need to do it, and you can just kind of move past it because you've been getting feedback and formatively assessing along the way, then you need to skip explain because you're good to go, then skip explain and go to elaborate. It is there are 5Es here, but I have absolutely skipped explain from time to time, or because we were running out of time, I skipped the elaborate piece because we needed to get to the evaluate. We needed to get to that last part of this, to the assessment piece, and I needed to skip elaborate because we were running out of time because these first 3 steps took so long. There's no 5E police who are going to show up at your school and in your classroom and say you didn't do any elaboration, now you're under arrest. So, or you're not doing inquiry because you didn't elaborate. Like, ignore those people, because the idea here is to involve students, right? We'll go back to those first 3 kind of big premises. You're involving students. They're asking questions. They're exploring. They're having the opportunity to kind of learn bits and pieces of this without direct instruction. So the next part is kind of some essential components that are, again, parts of inquiry-based learning. Just because you don't do all 5 doesn't mean that you're not working towards this idea of using inquiry in your class. It is, these are just the 5 kind of big things that you should try to make sure you could get in there. But if you don't have time for something because you just don't have time, then that's okay. It's the process. It's getting kids thinking about this in a different way, thinking about school and thinking about their content and their skills in a different way. So you've got orientation and observation. Teacher introduces a topic, students explore, right? That's that kind of explore piece of the 5Es. Question and conceptualize. Students develop questions, again, through the engage piece, make predictions, hypothesize. That could be exploring as well. The investigation, where students are looking into the answers to the questions. Again, it could be teacher supported or it could be on their own, which again falls into that explore piece. A conclusion, after they've got all their answers to their questions, they need to kind of finalize that, make it a little bit better, or make it sure that it's clear for everybody so they can discuss and share. So you've got this piece here for conclusion would be explain, and then discussion and sharing would be part of explain as well. And then you could go back and use any one of these for the elaborate piece, right? It might be new questions are brought up after everybody discusses and shares what their findings were. It might be that it leads to a new observation or a new way of thinking about things, which develops the questions, which leads to more investigation. Or it could be the teacher pushing it a little bit and saying, okay, now you've got all this part. Now let's look at how we can apply this. So if you think about it in terms of proving the Pythagorean theorem, right? You could absolutely you design the observation so that they're looking at this and being like, oh wow, do the math and be like, oh, that's super weird. Does it work for every one of them? Right? They ask the questions about it, they investigate it, they draw their conclusion to it, they discuss and share, and then the next question could be, does this only work with right triangles, or will this work with an acute triangle, or will this work with a different shape or a different type of triangle? Is this only for triangles? Can we use the Pythagorean theorem to help us with squares or rectangles, right? So that would come naturally. It could come naturally if you kind of facilitated it that way in a discussion and sharing piece, which would then lead to elaboration. And then when you're all said and done, they work through these again for the elaboration piece, and then you have the assessment at the end, however you want students to kind of show their learning. So these all fit into the 5 E's just fine. They are important pieces, but again, if you don't have time for one part of this, again, there's no inquiry police that are going to show up and arrest you. So here are the kind of the last little bits of here as I wind down. Here are some resources that you might find helpful if you're interested in starting inquiry-based learning. So this is Futures Focused Learning. This is a blog, and on this blog, it has some really great kind of projects that have already been done that include discussion questions, resources, and videos to get you kind of thinking about what this could look like. The same with Learning by Inquiry, the same idea. It's some different inquiry ideas that you could possibly use, or to kind of get your brain thinking about what are some possibilities of this inquiry model. This Edutopia here, this link actually takes you to a whole list of articles that are focused on inquiry-based projects and this idea of inquiry. And then this last one, XQ, is again full of information about where to start, considerations, research, things like that. So if you are looking to do this, but you need to convince your admin that this is a good idea, XQ right here is a fantastic link because it has some really great research about how inquiry-based learning can have a positive effect in a classroom. So if you need to convince anybody that this is where the direction you want to go, this is a fantastic way to start that. And that's it. So if you are interested in learning more, or you have questions, or you feel like I glossed over something or skipped something and you'd like to ask some more questions, feel free to email me anytime. I'm also on Twitter at ME Math Science. And if you're interested in a contact hour for this, what I'll ask, this link right here will take you to a Microsoft form. This is the end of the form, not the beginning of the form. There's one very, very straightforward question. Oops, I don't know where it just went. Oh, there they are. One very straightforward question, one question that I'm curious about just for my own feedback, and then an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have about, or give me suggestions about some future PD that you might like to see. Once you hit submit, so let me just throw this in here real quick. Once you hit submit, it'll give you a thank you message and then a link to the contact hour page, which looks like this. All you have to do is just put your name at the top, submit and print, and it will automatically create a PDF for you, or it'll automatically open up your print so you can print it off and do your get your hour. So as always, if you're interested in, or if you have any questions about other technology integration, or you don't know where to start and you want some help, kind of how can I integrate technology in my classroom, or I really want to use this, or I have this really interesting idea about this and I need some help figuring it out, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm happy to come to your school and work with you, or we can work through Zoom if you're more comfortable, and we can get you started. I'm also happy to come in and work with your students, or act as as kind of a backup, so that if you're teaching a lesson and you're introducing a new technology to students and you would like just someone to be there to kind of help you troubleshoot, happy to come and be that person as well. So I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will be back next week with citizen science.